Coming up next is this discussion. This session speakers include Katie Rudy, Global Chief Data and Analytics Officer, ISG. Katie is responsible for the development of ISG data solutions and platforms to deliver new and even more valuable insights to our clients as part of the overall ISG platform strategy. Ravi Chabria, MD NetApp. Ravi has held leadership roles at innovation technology companies such as NetApp, Sun Microsystems, Silicon Graphics, and early-stage startups. Ravi has led a wide variety of company transformation initiatives in support of revenue and market share growth. The session chair is Pradeep Menon, MD and Head, HSBC Technologies. Prior to HSBC, Menon was associated with General Electric as the Global Head and Vice President of Data Analytics for GE's Digital Hubs. He was earlier working with Maersk as the Global Analytics Leader and was also associated with Dell in various data leadership positions. It's over to you, Pradeep.
Thank you, Shreya. Just to get started, convergence is not really a new term in enterprise IT. It's been a buzzword that's been around for a couple of decades. But back then, by today's standard, it was a lot more simple. It was more of convergence of different technologies with the idea that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Now, some quick examples here. Many B2C organizations have made previously disparate processes around customer complaint, resolution, satisfaction, talking to one another, and thus improving the customer satisfaction and gaining data on preventing the same thing from happening again. In my own industry in banking, fraud detection happens using real-time analysis of multiple data streams, even using machine learning these days. And then technology convergence is all around enabling many of these things, right? So the same fraud detection tool wouldn't be as quick and cost effective without the convergence of cloud, connectivity, AI, APIs, and so on. Today, though, our discussion is on the convergence of processes, data, and technology. It's almost like a convergence of convergences, right? If you look to the left side of the slide, if you come to think of it that way. I was just thinking yesterday that a self-driving car is probably a great example of convergence of convergences. We've got data streams that feed in to that, the ability for the car to drive itself. We've got technology and engineering that make the ability to use that data to go make things happen. And of course, multiple processes in terms of how it works around the various navigational situations that it needs to come in, following the laws of the land, which are around processes, right, which have now converged to make self-driving cars possible. Now, most of us in this gathering and have gone through, are probably going through, or even have gone through, or led transformation projects of some sort, right, bringing these elements together in some fashion. Now, these three elements have individually matured to the point where the next big transformation will come from the convergence of these elements. Getting this convergence right is imperative, because if, as the proverb goes, if we don't do it, somebody else will, right? And the differentiator will be those who do it better, faster, and in a way that it drives better customer outcomes. When we were discussing this topic with nasscom, I found pretty good resonance with what we were doing in the technology function here at the bank. I spent a quick minute or two talking about that before we head into a panel, as Shreya was discussing, or Shreya was introducing, with two great leaders from two different verticals, right? Well-known leaders there. At the bank, we have reimagined our technology transformation to deliver three key priorities, which is on the right side of the slide, right? So we've got speed, scale, and resilience. Now, if we are to deliver software and features at a greater speed to the business, it is by greater automation in the software delivery lifecycle. And that's a technology component for us. We do that using agile delivery mechanisms, which are then intermingled with the right business processes so that you drive the right outcomes. And that's a process component right there. Scale rides on cloud technologies and data. Resilience requires building and securing systems by applying design thinking principles, ensuring that we have self-heal capabilities, rejigging our processes to reduce downtime, cyber threats, ensuring that we withstand them, show defense in depth, and so on. Now, as you can see, our approach to the convergence of convergences has been how we could use speed, scale, and resilience priorities, and they all have multiple touch points with the three elements that we spoke about: process, data, and technology. And of course, there's a people aspect to it that's so very critical. I'm sure both my panelists would agree with me on that. And as obvious as it may be, one cannot overstate it. This convergence is also about how customer centricity is and how best we can drive our outcomes, and not just in how we deliver software or engineering to the outcome. It cuts across as a culture. A couple of quick examples, right? I mean, a credit risk application, it's a technology solution, automates manual business processes, crunches massive amounts of data to help with credit risk assessment. It's built around agile development processes, developed from modern technology of cloud, data, and I'm sure, while Ravi is going to talk about some of these examples in depth. So this, I remember being very fascinated by the movie Inception, and that somehow stayed with me for a while. But there was a lot of convergences, if you come to think of it. And again, along with the imagination that went into making it. The short summary here is that the convergence of these three principles, these three pillars of data, tech, and process, it's at all levels. It's happening right now. Even a relatively simple personal finance application today crunches data across the customer portfolio. It provides insights, it nudges customers about their money management habits and helps them in achieving their saving goals, right? So that's about how all this is coming together. With that, I'm going to welcome our two panelists for this session, Kathy and Ravi. So Kathy and Ravi, there you go. Right. So thank you. Let me start initially with Kathy, right? So Kathy, let me start a discussion with you, and in an attempt to unpack where in the digital maturity scale convergence really plays out. It would be interesting to hear your views on how an organization's digital maturity influences convergence, right? So where in some cases there'll be some distance to go. So do you have any recommendation on what to do, more importantly, what not to do?
Simple. You really need to start with your processes. So if your processes are not converged across your business, you really aren't at the level of maturity to move to data convergence. So thinking about the maturity level, process convergence, I think is the first step. Taking a look at, so for example, you talked about the connected car or the manufacturing, right? Right now, our automobile is an entertainment center. It's a telephone. It is a way for you to get from place to place, but it's also a computer. And if you don't have the convergence between your manufacturing engineers that are engineering the design of the car and your software engineers that are designing the technology inside the car, and those processes aren't converged, you're going to have a very hard time getting to the next level. That next level, as you talked about, was technology, right? So you need to have your technology converged in a way that allows you to drive AI, ML, IoT. Cars right now are throwing off so much data. And the data, especially manufacturing, the data sensors that are giving us information. And that data requires what? Technology convergence. So I think the next step in maturity from process to me is the technology convergence. Do you have your edge computing in place? How are you handling storage in cloud? How are you delivering data back and bringing data in? Once you get that done, then I think the next level would be your data maturity, and then start thinking about how you can use that data in a converged infrastructure. You really brought in a lot of other things that I think are super important. One is culture. Is your culture ready to converge? So are your software engineers and your manufacturing, your engineers of the car, are they ready to work together? Do they have the same type of processes? Are they working in an agile way? Do they understand and have the same goals and the same risk and reward for what they're trying to put together as a team? So I think those are things you need to think about in terms of your level of maturity and where you start. Start with your processes, think about all the good stuff in there. Then is your technology ready? Then go on to the data and how that data can converge to create even a more richer experience for your customers and your internal teams.
Thanks a lot, Kathy. Just moving on from your area, some interesting things that you touched upon, especially and reiterating the focus on culture. But coming to your area, Ravi, with AI and ML, and NetApp is a big player in this space, with AI and ML running on cloud, and they're making huge changes in the way certain critical business processes are run. Yep. You can't work without data tech. So how are you seeing data and deep tech driving that current phase of transformation and convergence? How is it helping with business goals? Your take on it.
Super question. And I think interesting way to kind of position it. So first thing, let's look at what's driving the convergence, right? So we've been talking about data very differently in the last 5 years, maybe in the last decade, but it's drawn upon us in the last few years, right? We talk about data as an asset. Now, when you try and make an asset real, you have to ask, does it behave like one? Do you get leverage out of it? Can you create new things out of an asset? What use is the asset if you're not getting some form of a return? So we'll get to that. We'll talk about the value of data as an asset. But the second part that's driving the convergence, it's software that's being delivered as a service, software that's being consumed as a service. The third element, right? Platforms. Platforms are now being delivered at scale. Infra is being delivered as a platform. So when you look at these three things come together and you look at the talent that kind of pulls it all together, the number one question is, what are you driving? We say we drive speed, we drive agility. But it comes down to what end? It comes down to your driving transformation of businesses. So I'd like to give you all, a couple of examples maybe as you look at what's driving transformation. If you look data as an asset, question is it allowing you to leverage it to new products, new offerings? Really good examples of that, right? You can go back into what used to be considered traditional world of, big data. Look at how animated films are made, right? It's a complex process, 3 to 4 years of intense, really intense incubation of ideas, of innovation, of really deep collaboration among really bright people. You look at it as an asset and you say, okay, you've got the feature film 3 years from now. You then have a sequel. You then have a TV series. You then have a attraction at a theme park. It's based on those same assets, right? So that's one way of saying, can data drive leverage? The more interesting things that we see coming up now are whether businesses are able to transform themselves on the basis of data. So give you an example. In Ireland, there's a clinical trial company. Think of them as a specialty data provider, a company called Icon, right? Their specialization is if you and I were to do a clinical trial, we go to them for data. What's been discovered in the past? What do you know? How can you speed things up? Well, look at how they took that data. They turned it from something that was a simple subscription. They built it out onto a platform that gave them AI, ML capability. They staffed it up with data scientists. They're now providing that as a service. Fundamentally changes the nature of the business, right? It is arguably a very, very different business. And more importantly, I think it enables others to build bigger businesses on top of that, right? So you can use them as a service and do it. And we're seeing a lot of that, right? We talk about cloud. It's not just infra. It's about speed and agility and how businesses are transforming. And it's the convergence of technology that's pushing that very big way. You're seeing it all around us.
Very interesting. In fact, thank you. And I can't help but write down the comment that you made where you said, do you question if the asset actually behaves like one? I mean, is it, we're just so used to thinking about certain things in certain contexts that we don't necessarily question the context in which we see it anymore. So that's an interesting insight. Thanks, Ravi, for that. But, moving on to the people side of things, and this is a question that I'm going to have for both of you, probably Kathy, and then I'll come to you, Ravi, on this, is the topic says data, process, and tech, but convergence is also, and we both of us, all three of us, in fact, spoke about this, where we said that there's a people and a culture issue. Now, typically, there are different stakeholders for each of these, and also within each of these functions, there'll be impacts on back office, front office employees, and so on. How have you seen this play out? What's the role of work culture in your respective organizations? How have you seen this, right? So let me start with you, Kathy, and then I'll come to Ravi.
I think the business comes together and designs a new organization or a new design for a new product they're going to launch. And oftentimes they forget that there's people involved in making that happen. Too often the people element is the last thing on the list. Oh, well, let's go tell the teams. And that statement, tell the teams, is telling, right? You're not involving the people in the process, and you're not engaging them along the way with giving them the why. Why are we doing this? What, the old what's in it for me, but really bringing the people in to the very beginning, having them buy into the process and giving them the why. Why are we doing this as an organization? What are the outcomes we're looking to gain? And how can you provide valuable insights, how we value you and how you can bring this to fruition and really make us all successful along the chain. We've been more and more seeing organizations ask about org change management and the science or the culture of change and the brain science around change and how they can bring their teams along the way. And we're finding that more and more of the projects that we work with, just our clients and internally, is that element comes in sooner than, well, let's just go tell the teams we've made this decision. It's going to be great for everybody. So org change management has become part of the package, so to speak. It's a line item, but it's a big line item that's thought about and planned for now in most successful organizations. Otherwise, we've all heard about large scale change that has failed. And I think it's failed because you forget the culture and the people angle.
And Ravi, your take on that?
Very similar. I'll just probably bring in another dimension to this conversation, right? In the domain of data and then in the domain of deep tech that's enabling stuff. So we've brought upon some sea change upon ourselves. Take any consulting business, it's deep tech enabled now. You know, you look at the big four, you look at the next four, anything that you do as customer facing is tech enabled, right? It's insight driven. It's putting a tremendous amount of pressure essentially on the talent supply. You look at what's happening even in traditional, product development companies. It comes down to the same tech convergence, right? You deliver software as a service, infra as a platform, you drive down the cost of developing software drastically, right? Let me tell you how drastically. If you look at the 40,000 plus startups in India today, 2/3 of them are not tech startups, they're built on tech platforms, correct? So you're enabling new businesses, you're creating talent, you're driving innovation on platforms. Now there's a lesson to be learned there for traditional businesses and companies too. Do you have an internal platform where your own people can innovate? You have to think of your own people differently. You have to think of your own talent differently. But you look at the whole notion of what's happening there. We competed in the tech industry for tech talent. We're now competing with non-tech industry for tech talent. You're seeing tech talent being drawn to retail. You're seeing tech talent being drawn to consulting, like I said. They're being drawn into financial services, into healthcare. If I put out a data science rec and you come in onto my website and look at it, somewhere in there, you're going to see an HR organization looking for the same talent. When did that ever happen, right? So it's kind of something that we've created on our own, but there's an opportunity in there, right? Product companies are now innovating. So internally, to the change aspect, to the employee engagement aspect, if you build your entire processes internally, development processes as a platform, you fundamentally have a more engaged workforce. We are also looking at, what skills do these new folks need? How do you attract and retain talent, right? And you have to look at new skills. You have to look at how are you enabling them to master new skills. Do people come in to learn the skills that you are able to give them? Are you able to provide big problems for folks to work on? More importantly, with the workforce that we are now getting, which is increasingly younger, which is increasingly looking at sustainability, some of them are also looking at, are you working on solutions that matter, right? A lot of this is new to us, right? And we're going to have to adapt.
Very interesting. And I think I was just thinking through as both of you brought out your points on people and culture, that even within my own organization, I've seen that when, for traditional engineering organizations, or when we're used to delivering engineering solutions, convergence of convergences can be a little bit unsettling. And unsettling because there's a little bit of the fear of the unknown, the way we don't know which way this is going to go. And there's always a people angle related to careers and the need to learn and, constantly be learning in today's world, which is so much more important than it was, let's say, a decade or a couple of decades ago. And I do think that removing the fear of failure from that, or giving a safe environment to people so that they can feel a lot more confident in the work that they're doing, I think that also plays a role, right? I think where organizational cultures, it says that accept change for what it is, and as leadership we clearly vocate that, we keep speaking about it every now and then. I think that's also something that is we've been trying, and I think it kind of seems to lead to certain extents. But moving on to another point, right? Let me again, go back to Kathy on this one. Kathy, some interesting points that we touched upon there, and going a little bit further on the people and the process angle, the business side has warmed up to the idea of process rejigging in the light of new technology, right? And we see that all around us. But are there new challenges that the data revolution has brought in your opinion, where existing business processes have to undergo far more drastic changes to accommodate such convergence, right? Do you see the short-term pain easily accepted in the industries or organizations you track? Like, what's your view?
Difficult conversation unless you can show value. And when I say value, it's either efficiency drivers, better customer engagement, improve margins, improve revenue. And if you don't come to the table with a value proposition for why they should change their processes and systems to incorporate data and to connect data between platforms or products, it's a flat conversation. They're busy with their own initiatives and their own strategy. They're busy with what they're trying to drive. So what I've really recommended is when you talk to the business, you better understand what their strategy is. What are they trying to do? What are they trying to deliver? And how can you show them the value of what you're asking them to do to change? How does that help drive into their strategy and help them achieve what they're trying to achieve? And really, it's really better, faster, cheaper, to make it really simplistic. Bless you. So I wouldn't go to the business and say, we need you to do this because it'll help our data program. I would go to the business and say, we're going to help you by redesigning and showing you how we can drive efficiencies, drive values, drive better customer engagement, whatever it is, and then ask them for what you need for them to do to change in order to drive that convergence across an organization. I mean, it sounds like motherhood and apple pie and kind of simplistic, but if you don't show them why, they're never going to comply or want to be part of the party, I guess.
And just staying on that, interesting thing. But Ravi, from your perspective, if you were to look at some of the challenges that you would have faced in your career and even within NetApp, what would they be, and what would you recommend to the audience in terms of how they could go about it?
So change is hard. And I think you can't understate that. It's always been hard. It's always going to remain hard. What's happening right now is change is coming in at a very frantic pace. And I'll give you maybe a few anchoring points when you look at a data-oriented software company like ours. Product life cycles are getting faster. Now, it doesn't mean you don't take 3 years to build a breakthrough product. But the point is the increments in which you're surfacing it in front of customers and getting feedback is a lot faster now. In some aspects, you're doing things in weeks and months. That does stretch the way you think in terms of your processes internally, in terms of how you enable your talent. Also, that acceleration comes at the cost of basically some technological change you're imposing on yourself. You're operating more like, you're not operating in a traditional waterfall based, you're being more agile, you're building based on platforms, you're building software on other software. You're looking at talent that needs to be retooled in a different direction. So mastery of technical skills, of new skills, very important factor for us. I think it's the backbone on which this industry has always sat. It's becoming front and center, even more important. Talent is getting very difficult to be able to attract and retain. You have to realize that if you don't understand that this is all talent-based, all technology and innovation is talent-based, you do it at your own peril. And you have to kind of draw upon the assets you have to be able to build that. So the fact that we solve problems that make a difference to the world, very important to the current workforce. I talked about it earlier. The fact that you have those kind of problems. So suddenly you're out there in social media and any kind of media you want, trying to explain to people what does it mean to come work in an environment. So it's a very high change environment. The way we are interacting with our talent is also different. The way we interact with customers is different. Customers want to innovate quickly. So they come back to us and they look at certain things, right? Fundamentally, you need to be simpler. That's what's going to drive the agility. Some fundamentally, you have to be able to enable them to be able to transform. You have to be able to move at their speed. It's all very taxing at some point if you don't do it very mindfully and very consciously in an organization.
Right. And I also think that even in this space, ensuring that we create the right learning structure. The culture around learning also matters a lot, right? Absolutely.
Never been more important, learning.
Right. Today's world than it probably used to be. Now, and again, I'll probably stay with you, Ravi. I think, and while this is pretty much a phenomenon that's impacting the whole world, and we all as leaders grapple with it, right? The great resignation, the great talent need. And for instance, we have been experimenting with gig economy, right? Internal gig economies, and we can have talent marketplaces, and most large organizations would do it. I'm sure Ravi, Kathy, all of you would have tried it, right? And that's one way to look at it. But in general, with convergence coming in, and we spoke about learning in just a short while ago, how are we dealing with this attrition, talent crunch, but it's exacerbated because one of the challenges as leadership or as organizations, the ecosystems that we operate in will face is the more convergence, the more demand on some of the technical talent, and in general, the talent pressures there, right? So how do you reckon? So sometimes that can create some fear of not necessarily reaching out. So Ravi, your take on it before I go to Kathy on it.
So I think I've used the word inevitable before. It's let me also say this is we brought it on ourselves. So you can't say that just look at the way tech industry's been, disrupting the environment, right? For decades now. I think you can go back to the 1950s and say tech has been disrupting the world. Well, we've disrupted ourselves now. We've driven down the cost of building software, building technology. More and more people are finding the utilization of technology to be a huge benefit. Clearly, it's going to impact talent gravitating towards it. There's a limited talent pool right now. If you go back to the early days of any new technology, you come through these crunches, right? I remember there was a time Java was the next big thing, right? It took a few years before you suddenly found out that you could kind of build up a talent pool at scale in there. So there's one, right? So I think that you are going through a very, hyper growth environment right now as far as talent is concerned. That's one. Over time, you have to realize that some of these skills are going to become a little more ubiquitous. The platforms that allow you to use them more easily is going to increase, right? So it's going to become a lot more less stressful on the system in terms of talent. But it's also shifting the nature of stuff. I think we realized this a few years ago. We were developing software, but given the tools and tech we were using, we realized there was a skill that we never looked at before that we needed. We needed a statistician. We needed somebody that understood math on staff, because otherwise you can't understand the tools and what they're producing for you, right? So I think the nature of the talent workforce is shifting too. You're seeing that now in the education system. You're seeing it in the way we are bringing people on, in how we are educating folks. It's going to continue at some point, but it will stabilize to a new normal.
And I like the way you've said that, right? And I'm going to come to Kathy in a while on this. But one of the things that we as an organization have also really felt is that you can't fight it. It's the way.
No way.
For a very long time we said that we've been disrupting others. At some point in time, this is bound to happen, right? These things go in cycles. I think it's more important to probably embrace it and probably take that change and figure out that, the very concept of resilience, which is, okay, if you're going to be resilient, you're going to be adapting, if you're going to be future fit, what does that mean for us? Now, we are a traditional bank. And again, we work in an environment where there's a lot of new banking, probably, different forces that the banking industry faces, digital banks and so on. And I think convergence in that sense is also shorten the arm for the need for change that large organizations see, right? So I think we've been adapting. There's a lot of internal discussions and there's a lot of internal thinking that goes into how does what we do today hold us in good stead, let's say 5 years from now or 10 years from now, right? So I think that's kind of key. But again, moving on to you, Kathy, right? Now, while Ravi and I, to some extent, are from the, we spoke about the hunt for talent, we are in the similar industry, but you deal with you've got this vantage view about a lot of organizations that you consult with, right? How will that availability throttle tech, right? So what's happening in the near term? Your take on that?
In near term, and we haven't said the word once yet, I'm going to say it finally, COVID, right? COVID really pushed digital transformation in many organizations. It pushed it forward by years. It just said, we need to do this now. And organizations found that they didn't have the talent on their staff or their teams to deal with the new technology that they needed to put in place very quickly. So they pivoted to partners. They went external and they pivoted to partners. And those partners were then challenged with bringing that talent on board. And what service providers have found is that they're increasing their training programs or their learning programs, bringing freshers in, putting them through very intensive training programs, and then putting them on large-scale transformations, innovations with senior-level people to lead those transformations. But Ravi said it's inevitable, right? No one's going to stay. We're not going to stay in organizations as long as at least I have. People are going to cycle out and go look for new challenges. So you have to plan for that inevitableness of the churn you're going to have in your organization. He also mentioned things like how you have to engage with people that are coming into your company in a way that resonates to them and with them. What kind of a culture are you? How do you treat the environment? What are you looking at from a social perspective? What is your diversity, inclusion, and equity program? How do you manage your own social consciousness? This is important to people right now, and that engages them with you and brings them into the company. I think also what we're finding is people know their worth. And they're asking to be valued in a company. They're no longer willing to sit back and take a lower pay. They know the value they bring and the skills that they have. So we're seeing that organizations are really shifting the way that they view their recruiting, their learning. I know even many organizations have said when you hire somebody, until you bring them in the door, you don't stop holding their hand. You keep them warm the entire way and bring them in. So we're finding new ways of engaging with our teams and giving them the challenges and the learning and the corporate culture that they really are craving.
Yep. Before, and I think, we're kind of out of time, but one last thing that I'm going to just do is, ask us for what our favorite convergence technologies are. For me personally, I do believe that the transportation space and a lot of the drones that we have and self-actuated drones, where they would come into the logistics space and make a lot of things easier. I'm probably looking forward to that a lot more. So for me, that's a big convergence, but your respective takes. So going to you, Ravi, what would be your favorite convergence that you'll watch out for?
I don't think we've seen it yet. I'll just go back to this one statistic that I looked at, right? 2/3 of our startups now are building on tech, not doing tech themselves, right? So this power of human creativity being built on technology, we are kind of seeing this come of age now. It's just very, very early days, right? I have a feeling.
So you will
give you a data point. We are a 30-year-old company, right? We're looking at we are looking at data growth in the next 3 years, equivalent to what we saw in our first 30 years of existence. The world's changing too fast.
Oh, got it. So you'll probably reserve judgment on that. But
reserve judgment, for sure.
Right. So Kathy, what would be your favorite? What are you watching in the convergence space?
Well, healthcare for me. And I'll give you a specific use case. We had a client come to us and say they were a hospital system, healthcare system, and they had built a platform internally and they were ready to bring it to the next level. But what this platform did is it took samples, specimens from cancer or potential cancer patients, and it imaged all of these samples. And then they went out. So this was convergence of convergence, right? They went out to other systems and said, we want to take all of your samples. They applied predictive analytics and intelligence on top of it, and they could start to predict somewhat what treatment would be best for a cancer patient. They could also predict your lifespan on, based on the kind of cancer you had and the treatments that you were going to receive, and if the cancer would morph into something more, from stage 1 to stage 4. So I think that is just amazing that they can start to use predictive analytics to drive treatment and to drive lifespan. And it'll, as Ravi has said, we don't know yet what the greatest thing will be, but I think that big advancements in healthcare.
Fantastic. Thank you. It's been amazing talking to both of you all. Thanks, Kathy. Thanks, Ravi, for making time. I've totally enjoyed our discussion. With that, I'm going to hand it back to Shreya. Shreya, back to you.
Thank you so much. A thought-provoking session indeed. The world as we know it is going to change. Looks like collaborations across different industries is going to be the new normal. Technology transformation, like Pradeep mentioned, is going to be about speed, scale, and resilience. Truly.